Hi everyone, thanks for listening in to my talk today. My name is Victor Bhattacharya. I'm a product engineer on the geocoding team, and this is geocoding workflows in Python. So a quick overview of what we're covering today. First, we'll talk a little bit about publishing locators in Python. Then we'll talk a little bit about the ArcPy.geocoding.locator object. Now, this locator object supports a bunch of different operations, including geocode, reverse geocode, suggest, and geocode with suggest, so autocomplete functionality, and then properties as well. So that's properties of a locator, getting the properties, setting the properties, stuff like that. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about automating your geoprocessing workflows in Python as well. All right, let's dive right in. First is publishing and sharing locators. So this is creating geocoding services on ArcGIS Server and ArcGIS Enterprise. So let's say you've built a locator based on the data that you have for your city, maybe the streets, the parcels, or the points, and you want to share that locator to your ArcGIS Enterprise organization or to ArcGIS Server. So why would you want to create a geocoding service? So creating a service makes it easy to share locator with colleagues. So once you publish a service to ArcGIS Server or ArcGIS Enterprise, there's a REST URL endpoint that you can point your colleagues at and say, hey, I have this locator stood up as a geocoding service. You can go check it out at this URL. Publishing a geocoding service also offloads the processing power to ArcGIS Server. So when you're geocoding in Pro or in a configurable app against a URL or a geocoding service, the actual processing is happening on the server instead of on your desktop or on the client machine. And then finally, once you have a geocoding service URL, this allows it to be usable in configurable apps and Pro. And you can write applications against this geocoding service. So let's dive into a code sample, since this is the Dev Summit after all. So this is publishing a locator to ArcGIS Server. So this is assuming you have ArcGIS Server stood up, so a standalone server, not with portal, data store, all that stuff. So this is standalone ArcGIS Server. So with standalone ArcGIS Server, you'll want to have an AGS connection. So you'll want to create your AGS connection file in ArcGIS Pro, and you'll need either a publisher connection or an admin connection. So you'll have the path to your AGS connection file on your machine. Make sure to not include the .ags extension. You'll also want the path to your locator on your machine, and don't include the .loc at the end. You'll want to give the service a service name, define a bunch of paths for where you want to dump the SD draft file, the SD file, and then this is sort of the meat and potatoes of the call. So it's the create geocode SD draft call. Now all of these are pretty standard inputs. We've defined the locator path, the where the SD draft file stays, the service name of what you want the service to be called, in this case Redlands Locator, and a bunch of other parameters as well, summary tags, and then there's this overwrite existing service parameter as well. So if you have an existing service, let's say you've already published a Redlands Locator, but you have updated data, you could, in ArcGIS Pro, build a new locator with your updated data using the create locator tool, and overwrite your existing service by passing the same service name that already exists and passing this flag, overwrite existing service equals true. And that will host your brand new locator with all the updated data that you've built onto your ArcGIS server for everyone to use as a URL. And then finally, you'll call stage and upload with your AGS connection down here. All right, now we've got sharing a locator to ArcGIS Enterprise. So if you've got portal, server, data store, all that good stuff set up, then you'll want to share your locator to ArcGIS Enterprise using this method. Same thing as before, we've got our locator path first. then if you're using ArcGIS Enterprise, you'll want to use this in-server variable and point to your hosting server. So the URL to your hosting server, as well as you'll want to call arcpy.signIntoPortal with the portal URL here, as well as the username and password. And then same thing, we'll call create geocode SD draft with all of those good parameters. And finally, we have stage service and upload service definition. Now here, instead of putting the AGS connection in upload service definition, you'll pass in server, which is the URL to your hosting server. For more info about documentation for sharing a locator to either ArcGIS Server or ArcGIS Enterprise, you can visit this URL. So esriurl.com/python publish locator. This will take you to the create geocode SD draft page, and you can in-depth look at all of the different parameters and all of the options for the different parameters. And that page has code samples as well for you guys to get started. All right, moving right along. Now let's talk a little bit about the ArcPy.geocoding.locator class. This is a new way to access and use locators in Python. So the ArcPy.geocoding.locator object was introduced at ArcGIS Pro 2.6. So if you have Pro 2.6 or a later version of ArcGIS Pro, you can take advantage of this new API. There's 3 ways to create a Python locator object. The first is from a path to your locator on your machine. So if you have your machine on disk somewhere, either on your C drive or D drive, you can pass a path to your locator and instantiate a locator that way. If you have an AGS connection on your machine, then you can instantiate a locator on that AGS connection, and you can create a locator via that ArcGIS Server locator. And finally, if you have your locator published to ArcGIS Enterprise, you can instantiate a locator via a URL after calling arcpy.signIntoPortal. As I said earlier, all of these different kinds of Python locators, no matter how you instantiate them, support geocode, reverse geocode, suggest or autocomplete functionality, so typing in half of a string and it will suggest the rest of the address or place for you. And then finally, properties. So whatever properties are supported for that locator, getting the values for them and setting them to new values as well. All right, let's look a little bit at how you would instantiate a locator in each of these ways. First is creating a locator from a path. So let's say you have a path on your local machine, D data locator is my city locator, and you create a arcpy.geocoding.locator object on this locator path. And then once you have this locator object, you can call different methods on it. So you can call locator.geocode, my home address, and you can print your output. Let's say you have a locator published to standalone ArcGIS Server, then you can also create a locator via AGS connection. So if you have your AGS connection file, you can type in the path to your AGS connection file using the backslashes, and then this last one should be a / here, and then the name of your locator. If you have a folder here, so if you have a folder on ArcGIS Server, then let's say if your folder is called folder name, then it would be agsfilename.ags/folder name/Canada, or CAN in this case. And just like the same way before, we call arcpy.geocoding.locator of this locator path, and we have our locator object. Once we've got our locator object, we can call the .geocode method on it, and we'll be able to get results. Finally, you can also create a locator from a URL. So if you have your locator published to ArcGIS Enterprise, you first have to call arcpy.signIntoPortal with the portal URL here, as well as the username and password. And then you type in that URL to your geocoding service, followed by /item name. So whatever the name is of the item in portal my content, that's what you'll put in item name right here. instantiate the locator using that URL, and then you can do locator.geocode of whatever place or address you want to find. And then finally, you'll print the output. A quick note about ArcPy.signIntoPortal. If you don't want to store your passwords in plain text, which I don't blame you, what you can do is if you go to your backstage of ArcGIS Pro, as long as the portal you're trying to use is your active portal, so it's got this green check mark, if you're signed into this portal, Python will actually go grab those credentials from ArcGIS Pro. So instead of having to call ArcPy.signIntoPortal, as long as your portal is your active portal in the portal backstage in ArcGIS Pro and you're signed in, you do not need to call ArcPy.signIntoPortal. However, if you have a few different enterprise organizations here, as well as ArcGIS Online, if your active portal is one of your enterprise portals and you're trying to use the World Geocoding Service on ArcGIS Online, it will not work. So it only caches and stores the active portal in ArcGIS Pro. So let's talk a little bit about what this looks like in practice. So using the World Geocoding Service, so the portal URL is arcgis.com, put in my username and password. Here's the URL for the World Geocoding Service, which is the same always. And then instantiate the locator, locator.geocode. This is the Esri address in Redlands, and then you can print the output. So again, locator.geocode for whatever address or place you want. Next, locator.reverse geocode looks a little bit like this. It's a little bit different. So reverse geocoding is the operation of translating a point to a place or address instead of a address to a point. So first we need the point we want to input. We have to define a spatial reference here. And then we put in our point based on that spatial reference. We create this point geometry object, and we can pass this point geometry to our locator that we've instantiated, which in this case is the World Service. Finally, we have the suggest operation. So if we have half of a place, then we can do locator.suggest for half of a place, and we can do geocode with suggest. So once we have the suggest candidates for locator.suggest, then we can pass the suggest candidate. So in this case, Python indexes from 0, so we'll take the first suggest candidate, and we will pass it and do geocode candidates there. So in addition to all three of our geocoding operations, so geocode, reverse geocode, and suggest, we can also do locator properties. So depending on your type of locator, be that a local locator, a server locator, or a portal locator, instantiated in different ways, each one has a different amount of supported properties. So you could set or get the spatial reference, the supported roles. I won't read through all of them, but you can ask a locator for, hey, what are the categories supported for this locator? And so those with a star denote that this property can be set for certain types of locators. For more info and to read all of the documentation about it, you'll want to go to esriurl.com/Python locator, and then you can read about all of these different properties and how you would get and set them. Let's do a quick example of what setting a property looks like. So here I've got my Atlanta locator. I want to ask, hey, what is the min candidate score for this locator? So I'll print min candidate score. We'll see the output console gives me 60. So, all right, the min candidate score starts at 60. Now I spelled this address wrong on purpose. So it's 1171. It's actually Piedmont Ave. So I spelled Piedmont wrong and I put Boulevard here. I did this on purpose to get a lower candidate score. So I do locator.geocode on this incorrect address, and I get some address which is the actual address, Piedmont spelled correctly, and Avenue instead of Boulevard. and we see it's deducted the score a little bit. So it's not a score of 100, it's a score of 94. Now, just to make sure that this property is working, let's check the property. So we can raise the minimum candidate score here and say locator.minimum candidate score equals 95. Print the minimum candidate score. Boom. We've changed it to 95. That looks good. Let's geocode this address again that's incorrect. And this time we should not find any results since the score was a 94. And now we're only looking at candidates over 95. And as we see, we print that output and we get an empty list, which is as expected. We ask the locator what its minimum candidate score is, and again we see that it is in fact 95. Now there's two ways of setting a property. One is saying, hey, locator.property equals X. Now this will raise the minimum candidate score for just this Python run. If you want to persist that change in that property, what you can do is locator.property equals Y, and then call locator.updateLocator. Now this will raise the minimum candidate score for the locator until it's set again. So again, this is just for the duration of this Python script, and this is until someone sets it again. So this persists that property change, the second one. All right, so I've been giving you guys a lot of code samples, but you haven't really seen anything in action here yet. So let's pull up some code and look at what it looks like. So here we've got the World Geocoding Service. Now, like I said earlier, I don't need to call this ArcPy.signInToPortal. I don't need to call that because ArcGIS Online is my active portal on my instance of ArcGIS Pro right here. Pro does not need to be open, but as long as your active portal is the portal that you want to use that has this URL on it, then you should be good to go. So I have this World Geocoding Service. I'm instantiating the locator on it, and I'm saying start geocode. And I'm going to geocode the Esri address here, 380 New York Street, Redlands, California. And in order to not muddy up the output, I'm going to say, hey, only give me one result, so give me the best result. And these are the only outfields I want. So only give me the score, the status, what the address matched to, the X and the Y value, what address type it matched to, and the city. And then I'm going to print my candidates. So instead of doing one at a time, I'll kind of go through all of the samples and then click run, and you'll see all of the results there. So this is geocoding, so 380 New York Street. If we want to search for the Esri address but have an autocomplete suggestion, we can type most of Esri, right? ESR, and just leave off the I. Grab the first suggest candidate. Python index is at 0, so the first suggest candidate. And then set that equal to the geocoding candidates and say, hey, here are the suggest results, just printing a benchmarker here and printing the geocode candidates. And finally, the last operation that we have, which is reverse geocode. So first we define a spatial reference, like we showed earlier, put in the point. So this is the point for 380 New York Street, which is the Redlands Esri address. Create that point geometry object using the ArcPy.point and the ArcPy.spatial reference. Pass that point geometry into reverse geocode. Say, hey, here are the reverse results, and then print them. So let's run this script and see what we get. Cool. So as we can see, we geocoded 380 New York Street, and we get our X and our Y here. Its status is matched, and the score is 100, and the match address was 380 New York Street. So that looks great. Next, we're starting suggest here, and we have ESR. So that's most of the word Esri. And we see that we are able to match address to the word Esri, and we've got the same X and Y here. And then finally, we do the reverse geocode as well. So starting reverse, and we put in that X and that Y, and we've got 380 New York Street. So we're able to reverse geocode that point as well and get that desired result. Now, I'm just printing the results here, but as a dictionary, but you might want to grab these results and store them in a CSV or throw them in a feature class, but just for the sake of demonstration, I'm creating output dictionaries that you guys can take a look at. What's nice is these are Python dictionaries, so you can grab whatever key value pair you want by just grabbing the key and indexing in an easy way, because Python dictionaries are quite easy to work with. One last note is if you do plan to store the results, storing the results is a credit-consuming operation when using the World Geocoding Service, so this value must be set to true. All right, so that was a quick demo of using ArcPy.geocoding.locator to do geocoding. Now let's talk a little bit about geocoding using the geoprocessing tools. So this is copying a snippet from Pro. So my best recommendation in automating your workflows from ArcGIS Pro is to first run the tool in Pro. So the best way to automate your GP process is to run the tool in ArcGIS Pro, right-click Copy Python command, paste that Python command into your favorite IDE. Then you can edit the parameters so that they are full paths. This is in case you already added a feature class to ArcGIS Pro, then you might not end up with a full path, but in my case I will. And then finally, you'll run your new Python script. So let's do a quick demo of what this looks like. So geocoding, geoprocessing tools in Python. I've got create locator here, and I have all of my inputs filled in already. So it's a United States locator. We're going to use the Atlanta streets data available in the tutorial data. We've got our field mapping here, so we've mapped all our fields already. They all look good. We can determine an output location for our locator. D data 3, that looks fine. It is indeed an English language streets feature class. And those optional parameters all look good, so let's click run. And once our locator is created successfully, we right-click Copy Python command, and we paste it into our favorite IDE of choice. So we've got country equals US, and you can start filling all this in. Depending on how nice you want your script to look, you can add comments, this is a comment, etc. But this is the best, most surefire way to automate your geoprocessing workflows in Python, is first to run the tool itself, right-click, copy Python command, paste it into your favorite IDE, and then you have a skeleton script from which to work with. All the code snippets that I showed today will hopefully be available at esriurl.com/pythongeocoding. If I'm not able to upload them there, you at least have the doc samples available at those shortened URLs for you. So esriurl.com/pythonpublishlocator and esriurl.com/pythonlocator. The first one's for the publishing and sharing, and the next one is for the locator module. I hope you enjoyed my session. Please provide your feedback for this session by clicking the session survey link directly below the video. And thanks for listening in. Have a good one. Bye.